There is a crisis in academia, notably in the humanities, and more specifically in the field of literature, the art of literature, understanding it, appreciating it, and getting the beauty out of it into the world. You see, when there's a problem at the top in academia, the consequences filter down to the common person and daily life. To give you an idea of this crisis, the New Yorker ran an article a while ago, and it revealed a statistic that from 2012 to 2020 in American universities, the enrollment of students majoring in English literature dropped from 10 to 5%. So 50% drop. Of course, in certain liberal arts colleges that focus expressly on the arts, there was an equilibrium. But across major universities, including big ones like Harvard, a drop of 50%, some 75% enrollment drop. There's also a collapsing interest in literature within high schools. Teachers talk about finding it much harder to get pupils interested in literature itself. Now, there is a knock-on effect. Whether you're someone who loves literature or not, a lot of people don't appreciate just why the arts exist. I'm not going into that in this video. What I am going to do is we're going to take a look at the first of 5 reasons I feel that there is a decaying of appreciation for fine literature. And the other 4 will come in a sequence of individual talks over the coming weeks. So let's have a look at the first cause for the decaying of interest in literature. By the way, if you enjoy talks which give you something to think about and to chew on and form your own opinion, be sure to hit subscribe and ring the notification bell especially, otherwise you'll miss the upcoming videos when they come out. Naturally, when there is a decline of interest in any field or topic, it stems ultimately from people not seeing its value. Maybe being disinterested in it because of that, not seeing its relevance. But how has that come to take place in literature? Literature is one of the foundation blocks of the academy. Universities, for time gone by, since they started, were interested in crafting and reading the best that literature could offer as one of the arts. But now it's dying out. One student said they consider the humanities, of which English literature is one, to be more of a hobby kind of thing. And yet it used to be viewed as essential. Why the difference? Well, the first reason I'm going to present to you is because in academia, and by that I don't mean every individual professor, every teacher, there are brilliant teachers of this, but there is an academia problem here. One of the things they're doing is they're approaching literature with the wrong tools. I've been thinking about this for quite a long time. They're approaching it mainly as sociology and not literature. Now, let's unpack this and see how it has an effect. So, when you look around, if you go and look for lectures on the classics, okay, for instance, or interviews of people talking about should Shakespeare be taught in school, all that kind of stuff, or just on literature, if you look at papers on literature and class titles, you'll notice a trend that has been growing for quite a while, specifically over the last decade and a bit more. And that is the use of words like toxic masculinity, racism, entrenched institutes of power, oppression, feminism, anti-capitalism. Now, what I want to say about those things, because I know for a lot of people this is a hot political topic, not here it's not. That's not what we're here for. What I want to mention about those topics is they're all sociological topics. They're not necessarily literature. Literature can talk to them, talk about them, but a study of literature is not those things. If your focus is primarily on those things, You're looking at how literature has influenced society, not the literature itself. And that is a big mistake. It's using the wrong tool. It's like trying to weigh yourself with a thermometer. You know, you may want to use the thermometer, and the thermometer is a brilliant tool, but it's not the right one for the job. Now, I want to take it as a given that, irrespective of your views, any of those topics mentioned, where confronted in society, they should be talked about, they should be dealt with. That's a given. But nonetheless, it's a distraction from literature, because literature is not about those things. Literature is literature. It's a very individual thing. That's something that's going to be talked about in the next point next week. It's an individual thing of the artist and an individual thing of the reader. But let's get back to this idea of looking at literature as sociology rather than literature itself. So, I recently read a paper, and I'm using this paper as my example specifically because I thought it was a good paper. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. It was engaging, thought-provoking, and excellently written. But as I read it, there was a problem that came to my attention. Now, the paper itself is called Frailty, Thy Name Be Toxic Masculinity. And of course, that's a play on Shakespeare's word, thy name is woman. Now, this paper focuses in on Shakespeare's play, Hamlet. And it first starts by setting Hamlet up, saying, you know, that Hamlet, it does mention Hamlet's a masterpiece, and it focuses that this is not really a new concept, Hamlet. It's based off, you know, an earlier revenge play, which set the foundation for a lot of other plays like it. But then the paper goes on to want to focus on Ophelia in Hamlet, a great topic to focus on. Ophelia is the main female role in the play. Now, the paper begins to talk about the lack of Ophelia's voice, the lack of her perspective in this mimesis of family politics in which Hamlet is the main protagonist. We don't get Ophelia's backstory. We don't get fully explained her sudden acting of madness. It's just something that's there for the plot, for Hamlet to develop upon. And then the paper goes on to talk about two other works, one a film and a book, and the other just a film, where they develop the idea of the backstory of Ophelia herself, and how that's presented and how it ends as well. And that's all excellent. I really, really enjoyed it, and I mean that. So I'm not dissing the paper. But the reason I bring it up for this video is as I read through it, I began thinking, this isn't about Hamlet, nor is it really about Ophelia. This is about how to represent a person differently. In other words, it's about how to write a different story altogether. Now, of course, the topic itself of stories developing from previous stories, you know, I think it's Wide Sargasso Sea, isn't it? That Jean Rhys developed, taking a character from Jane Eyre. That's been done from time immemorial. A lot of the Greek myths and legends are just someone building off different characters that they saw in other of the legends. So there's nothing wrong with that, but the title itself gives away the angle that this paper is intended, which is to slightly bemoan the fact that Ophelia is not represented very well in Hamlet. Now, representation, again, I don't think anyone disagrees that people should be represented and people should have a right to represent themselves. But that's sociology. That is not literature. And yes, you can use literature in sociology, and literature can talk about these topics, but you're not studying the work itself. So I want to show you where this leads, unwittingly maybe. I began digging deeper on this idea, and I found quite a number of papers, and their focus seemed to be, or not just seemed, were, on what wasn't in a work. Now we're talking especially the classics here with the word problematic, which keeps cropping up. It's focusing on what's not in a work. So I'll give you an example. Jane Austen, fabulous writer, one of the best writers in the English language, in my opinion. There was a work that asked the question, where are the voices of the servants in Jane Austen's works? Another one took up the fact that lower class women are not represented in Jane Austen's work. How about Othello by Shakespeare, where it was critiqued for not paying enough attention to the expanding colonialist intentions of the state of Venice? Or there's Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe and the question, why wasn't Friday given an equal narrative voice to Robinson Crusoe? Now, the idea of equal voice, the idea of the working class being represented, the idea of the troubles of colonialism are all valid topics, all of them, right? And I've read about them and I like them. But the problem is that's sociology, it's not the literature itself. In simple terms, the reason Venice's expanding colonialism isn't talked about in Othello is because Othello's not about that. It's about the nobility of Othello himself and how that crushes him. Jealousy, envy, spite is all in there. Jane Austen's novels are not about the working class. And so to focus on them and give them several pages to the voice of one of the servants would be unrelated to the story. And here's an interesting thing. That betrays a misunderstanding of what makes a good story. It's like Michelangelo said about the statue of David that he carved. Someone said, how did you produce that? This may be folklorian, by the way. He says, David was already in there. All I had to do was chip off the marble. That wasn't him. In other words, crafting a masterpiece is what you leave out. And so all books have to leave things out. Now, the argument could be made, and fair enough, by the way, that yes, but when you look back and at this time there's no one representing the working class or giving them a voice. Okay, so was that a problem in their society? Yes, but what are we talking about then? We're talking about the problems in society. What are we not talking about? We're not talking about the literature itself. Now do you understand why you get comments from students who say you can get an A or an A minus in English literature as your degree and come out still knowing absolutely nothing? Now you can understand why some say, I went into university with a passion for reading and came out hating it. I've had emails from people who've done their master's degree and they've said after finishing it, they didn't read a book for 10 years because they despised books. What on earth has happened to cause that? That's a problem. Now, one of the reasons, and only one, this is not the whole reason, is what we've talked about. If you try and weigh something with a thermometer, you're going to be disappointed. Now imagine you're a student, you go in to university or you're in school and you think, I'm looking forward to digging in and learning about, I know there's something greater in these works and I really would like to draw them out. But then what you talk about is what isn't in the play. It's a bit like what other topic or study does that happen in? Imagine doing mathematics and you're studying Euclid's geometry and then the teacher says, now the problem with Euclid's geometry is the lack of baking recipes. Now, obviously I'm using hyperbole there. I suppose a more fair example would be the problem with Euclid's geometry is that it doesn't use enough calculus. Well, it's a different topic. I mean, calculus wasn't even invented until Isaac Newton with his big brain did it. But you see, they're not related. Or how about saying the problem with Charles Darwin's Origin of Species is it doesn't contain enough physics. But it's not about physics. And no one would expect to be looking at that in an evolutionary biology class. And that's the problem with academy at the moment. Reading lots of papers, there's a focus on sociological issues of today or sociological problems of the past, and not a focus on the literature. Imagine getting Bleak House out and saying, now the problem here, notice and ask yourself the question, why are there not more farmers in this? Well, it's because it's about Chancery Court, not about farms. Sociologically, off the top of my head, an interesting comparison would be, is there a lack of focus on agriculture by Charles Dickens, because he does spend a lot of time in the city, and then maybe Thomas Jefferson's ideas of agriculture as the basis of the economy, or Thomas Hardy's opining on the lost way of the agricultural life. That's an interesting topic, and you can read literature, and this is the thing, you can read books in which you see this, but when you're analysing that question, you're looking at sociology, you're not actually looking at Tess of the D'Urbervilles. You're not actually looking at what Charles Dickens is trying to do in Bleak House or Oliver Twist or whatever it may be. And so you come away with that approach confused as to what literature is. It's one of the reasons why some people say, I don't need to read books that are irrelevant to our modern time. I don't want to read books from dead white men. I need a more diverse curriculum. Not complaining about a more diverse curriculum. Keep looking for better books with different perspectives that are expressed brilliantly, by the way, that give grand visions, artistic visions, which magnify the magic of words and the ability to conjure up whole souls and whole worlds through the pen, to reveal yourself to yourself. That's what you want to give, not a critique on society. That's fine for sociology, but it's not for literature. And if you go in looking for the artistic inspiration of literature, but learn sociology, you'll come away thinking, literature's not very good, is it? What's the point? In fact, here's a sentence which pretty much sums it up. When you study literature from a sociological point of view first, you're not studying the art, you're studying the artifact of a bygone society. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please hit the subscribe and ring the bell if you want to get the next video. Make sure you don't miss it. I also want to add right here to all of those who are professors and doctors, have got masters, are teachers of literature. I want to remind you that I thoroughly respect you. I think teaching is one of the most noble professions on the planet. And I know that loads of teachers are brilliant. I know that tons of professors are excellent. I've talked with many who have shared, though, this same concern, not about individual necessarily people, but academy's structure and how it's undermining literature and a love of the arts. In fact, if you are an academic or a teacher, feel free to leave your comment down below and your own observations from your working in the field of literature. Until the next time, I wish you all joy in whatever you read.